What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to the show. It's Wednesday, June 8th, hump day, middle of the week here. And if I seem a little distracted, all of a sudden, I'm seeing all kinds of problems with iTunes and my email provider. I don't know if we're having another one of these hacker directnik attacks going on here, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show because there's a very troubling development out there that suggests the government is getting ready to stage a huge false flag on the Internet to bring about draconian Internet controls. Of course, it could just be iTunes being its normal, buggy self. But there do seem to be some problems out there following hard on the heels of the revelation that 25% of all hackers are working for the FBI, and maybe they're unhappy with the fact that I was talking about that story earlier today. Now, starting right off here, phone lines are open, 877-342-6673. During hour number 2 of our show today, we're going to be talking with Anthony Ibarra out of Diginet about these covert TV cameras that are in eyeglasses and pens, and they're a lot of fun, and right now they're actually very, very practical to have as we hear these stories about police who are basically shooting unarmed people in the street, and then they go around smashing up the cell phone cameras of everybody around there so that what they do is not getting out there into the world. So that's kind of what we're going on dealing with that right now. So starting off right now, obviously June 8th, this is the anniversary of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And it's one of the darkest episodes in the relations of Israel and the United States of America because, Israel still maintains, golly gee, it was an accident. We thought it was an Egyptian horse carrier. And the official U.S. government response is whatever Israel says, that's what reality is. And we all know better. The members of the crew all know it was a deliberate attack. We understand that Israel wanted to sink the ship and blame Egypt for it in order to trick the United States into the war on Israel's side. And there was, in fact, a nuclear-armed airstrike in the air on its way to Cairo when the deception was finally exposed. And to this very day, all the people who were actually there on the ship know it was a deliberate attack, and everybody else is around there saying, no, you're an anti-Semite if you don't accept that it was a complete accident, and the weather was terrible and we couldn't see anything. And they weren't flying a flag and all these other lies. And it was nonsense. The photos and movies shot on the ship during the attack show, it was clear skies, perfect visibility. The flag that was flying on the ship during the attack with the bullet hole still in it is on permanent display at the U.S. Cryptographic Museum in Washington, D.C. Some of the Israeli pilots and sailors have come forward saying that, yes, they knew it was an American ship. They were ordered to attack the American ship. So that is something that we definitely need to remember when we talk about America's so-called friend in the Mideast. They're not really very friendly. There's a long history of tricking us into making war on Israel's enemies, Iraq, Afghanistan, soon to be Iran. No dirty trick is too dirty if it gets those Americans to go out there and kill Israel's enemies. Now, another story that came out yesterday, I talked briefly about this embryologist in South America who had gone public with research showing that glyphosate, the chemical that is inside Roundup herbicide that is used to go after other people's cocaine plants in South America, causes damage to unborn human fetuses at levels of exposure below what is already being endured by people who live in farming country in the area where he's conducting his research. And then it was followed up. He basically went public with this in April, and more recently he was attacked violently by people connected with the agriculture industry, who, of course, love all these chemicals that they dump all over the food. Now, today, Huffington Report came out with this document, this report, that United States regulators have known since 1980, that's a 1, a 9, an 8, and a 0, that glyphosate does cause birth defects, Since 1980, they've known this. And they're still pouring it all over the fields of the food that you will eat. And that's backfired on them because now the Roundup Ready gene that protects the genetically modified seeds from glyphosate has migrated into the weeds. So now the weeds are proof from this weed killer, but you and your unborn children are not. And they've known about this all along. Industry regulators have known for years that Roundup will cause birth defects. And they did nothing about it. And, of course, it's reminding me of the situation that we had where the Minerals Management Service was turning a blind eye to safety shortcuts and violations down in the Gulf of Mexico. Look what happened there. We're finding out now more and more that nuclear power plants are being allowed to operate without required safety systems. The SEC turned a blind eye to Bernie Madoff. And all of these things ended in disaster. And so, too, will this. When the money junkies are this desperate for money, look at the damage and the risk to future generations. Now, the money junkies don't care. They want theirs now, and as long as they have their money fix now, they don't care what's going to happen to future generations. That's somebody else's problem to deal with. Radiation from Fukushima, oil and Corexit in the Gulf of Mexico. Now we're finding out the predominant weed killer sprayed on our produce causes birth defects. How many more of these hits can we take to our health and our well-being in service to the money junkies before we stand up and realize we are being driven in a very unhealthy direction simply because it is profitable? We need to be looking at that. We need to be looking at that. Now, getting over here in Libya, and speaking of radioactivity, they are now detecting depleted uranium munitions in Libya. So this idea that we're somehow there for the Libyan people is nonsense. We're showering the place with depleted uranium, 40,000-year half-life, for it to go away. And when it's vaporized and in the dirt and in the soil and the wind kicks up, people breathe it, it gets in their lungs, and they never, ever, ever get rid of it. Now, human rights workers on the ground in Libya, and this includes former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, are verifying and confirming that the NATO bombing is injuring and killing innocent civilians, non-combatants. The corporate media and NATO have been saying that's just propaganda. That's just Libya trying to propagandize that we're causing damage there. We're not causing damage because we're using bombs that only kill the bad people. Now we're finding out, of course, that that's very much not true. And as the propaganda front for the war in Libya continues to crumble, believe it or not, they're bringing back the Viagra story. Oh, yes, the government of Libya, they're getting huge cargo loads of Viagra to give to the soldiers so that they'll go out and they'll use rape as a weapon of war. And it sounds horrific. I think it's going to backfire because if you think about it, having to give the Libyan soldiers Viagra to get them ready to commit rape, it makes them look like they're kind of pussies, you know what I mean? They're quiche eaters. These aren't real soldiers we have to be afraid of. They need a drug to get it up, to commit rape. I think this propaganda is going to backfire on them, if anybody even believes it, and I don't think anybody will, because it makes the Libyan soldiers somehow look less threatening and less dangerous and less potent, if you will. It's a dumb story anyway. It really, really is, because if you send your soldiers out to be committing rape, then they're not there obeying orders when they need to. You're actually cutting your own military efficiency by letting the soldiers go out and do what they're accused of letting them do. So it's a dumb story anyway when you start thinking about it here. Now, over in Palestine, there has been yet another incident where peaceful protesters against Israel's apartheid are being met with violence by the Israeli Defense Forces, or in this case, offensive forces. Apparently there was a situation where Palestinian protesters attempted to cross through the Calandria checkpoint in the West Bank, and they were basically treated quite brutally. Now, what is really interesting is this article had a quote in there, and I'm going to give you the direct quote here. It's often been suggested in the American press that if Palestinians would stop engaging in terrorist violence and adopt nonviolent protest, they'd make more headway in their quest for a nation. Okay, so let's rewind that to the 1880s here in the United States of America and see how it plays. It's often been suggested in the American press that if the Indians would stop engaging in attacks on the cavalry and adopt nonviolent protest, that they'd make more headway in their quest for a nation. Yeah, that really worked out well, didn't it? Yeah, that nonviolent, just go along with authority worked really, really well for the Native Americans, who were upset over the fact that their lands were being taken away from them by force. And that's what's going on with Palestine. Everyone says Palestine should be peaceful. Why should they? It's their land that's being taken, their homes being destroyed, their children being shot. If Mexico was coming over the border forcibly in arms, would you sit still and let it happen, or would you fight back? We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're sorting out our problems with iTunes and email and all the rest of that stuff. A lot of computer criminals out there, at least 25% of them working for the U.S. government, and probably the rest are working for foreign governments right now, because the Internet is the high ground in the war for the minds of America. And there's information out here the government doesn't want you to see, because then they can't lie to you successfully. And if they can't lie to you, they can't rule you. They can't control you. So anyway, moving right along here and finishing up on the situation with Israel and Palestine. Over in New York, in Greenwich Village, the Gay Center has now reversed its earlier policy, and it's banning all talk on Israel and Palestine. And in response to that, Israel and Palestine are now banning all talk on gays. So I guess that kind of balances out there. No, they really didn't there. But basically, pressure was brought to bear. The Gay Center was allowing their premises to be used for political meetings and protests regarding Israel apartheid, and apparently Israel's supporters brought pressure to bear. And so now there's a ban. Yes, we'll talk about gays and transgender and all this other stuff, but we can't talk about Palestine. That's really icky. So, now, remember we've been talking the last couple of days about Sarah Palin and this endless stream of stupid remarks that she says. Ever see the movie Sixth Sense and the little tiny kid? I see stupid people, and they don't know they're stupid. That's Sarah Palin right there. Now, as you know, she is sort of in the hot seat because of this comment she made about how Paul Revere's ride was to warn the British, ringing bells saying, leave us alone, which is really ineffective as a military tactic. But setting that aside, it's completely untrue. Paul Revere and the other two guys, William Dawes was one, and I forget the name of the third, were riding not to warn the British, but to warn the colonials and the Minutemen and the militia that the British regular troops were approaching to do bad things to them. That's what happened. So Sarah Palin botched it. Everybody's laughing at her, and Palin's fans go over to Wikipedia and attempt to rewrite the page on Paul Revere to make it line up with what Sarah Palin had said. Shades of 1984. You know, when we're going to rewrite history to match the current political doctrine. We're there. George Orwell was right. We're seeing it right in front of us. Palin's tools are over there trying to change history to line up with whatever she says, whatever idiocy she comes up with tomorrow. And it's just, you know, we've always been at war with East Asia. That whole situation there. Now, OPEC ended their meeting basically saying we're going to keep things the way they are. Same amount of supply, same prices, everything status quo ante, and that's it. The Western media, of course, are trying to spin this, that this is a disaster, this is horrible, this is unthinkable. And there's a story headlined, OPEC meeting in shambles as Iran and Venezuela push their agendas. And they talk about, you know, is Iran and Venezuela politicizing the meeting there? Now, what actually happened is they basically sat down and said, we're going to go on selling our oil in the same amount for the same price. That's exactly what they said. But the spin on the story is thusly. Saudi Arabia is our friend because they support stabilization of oil markets, which means keeping oil prices low to please their American overlords. Iran and Venezuela, a.k.a. the bad people, have politicized the issue by wanting to charge a fair market price for their oil. And please keep in mind during this discussion, it is their oil. Now, this is the same thought processes that led up to the disaster at the Bay of Pigs Now, to give you a little bit of a historical overview for those of you who are not as old as I am, and thank goodness you're not, the U.S.-backed Cuban dictator Batista was a friend to the United States because he sold Cuba's agricultural produce to U.S. corporations like United Fruit and PepsiCo at way below market prices. It drove the Cuban people into poverty, but it allowed these United Fruit and PepsiCo and these other companies to make huge, huge, huge profits. Okay? Now, Castro was the bad guy because he wanted to charge fair market prices on the same products. So the United States tried to invade Cuba under the guise of liberating the Cuban people, which turned into one of the worst public relations disasters of all time, followed by a U.S.-imposed embargo that actually succeeded in driving Cuba into the Soviet Union's sphere of influence and persists to this very day out of nothing but U.S. government spite and petty vindictiveness. That we're going to show those people that they will sell their produce to us at low prices or we'll give them what for. So insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, and it's not going to work. The U.S. government, if it wants to buy the oil from these other countries, and remember, these countries are not really friends with us because they have felt the wrath of Israel through the years, and they're not happy with Israel's treatment of their fellow Middle Eastern citizens or the United States' unquestioning blind support for Israel's policies. And so if we're complaining about high gas prices, it is the U.S. government's obeisance to Israel that is really a key reason those valves get shut down just a little tighter and a little tighter every few months or so, and why the prices are going to be kept up. And again, it is their oil until the U.S. invades and takes it from them and gets your kids killed stealing it. Then it'll be our oil, and they'll still charge a lot of money for it. But that's basically what's going on. The U.S. government is throwing a tantrum that OPEC won't lower prices to help the American economy recover. And OPEC understands two things. One, the oil is going to run out eventually. They can't just give it away for free. They've got to maximize their profitability. And there's no point in trying to save the American economy because no matter what you do, the U.S. government just digs us in deeper to the bankers. And I'm sure those OPEC ministers are saying there's no point in trying to help these people. There's no point in trying to help the U.S. government. They can't get out of the mess they've created. So that's what's going on there. Meanwhile, Herman Cain, who's running on a I Love Israel platform, is out there screaming, there's no need to audit the Federal Reserve. These aren't the bankers you're looking for. You may move along. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to touch on this story, and this relates to what we've been seeing about, hackers. 25% of them are working for the FBI, this push for the new cybersecurity, and the government just constantly going all the way back to the Exxon Amendment, trying to find some way to justify coming into the blog and the alternative media and shutting it down or controlling it or in some way just making basically they want to turn it into another controlled corporate media network, sort of like an ABC, only with a few more buttons and keys on it, but still the content is controlled. It's always corporate friendly. It's always government friendly. And we're not going to muddle up the heads of the American people with things they really don't need to know, like the fact that Roundup weed killer is causing birth defects. So over the last couple of days, actually the last couple of weeks, but especially the last couple of days, we're getting all this talk about a new form of online digital virtual currency called Bitcoin. And I was starting to look at it a little bit, getting a little hint of tulips about it, but I was willing to take a look objectively. And then we saw this article about how 3 U.S. senators want to shut down this digital coinage because it allows you to buy drugs anonymously online. And I was saying, oh, that sounds a little weird. Kind of a little out there. Maybe they're just worried that this currency might displace the Federal Reserve note. Then a good friend of mine sent me a link to the actual website that purports, or actually it's a link to a story about the website that purports to sell you any drug that you want and get it to your home covertly. And it's called Silk Road. And this is not an endorsement, by the way. In fact, it's a warning. Now, the idea of this in the news story is that you get these bitcoins that are anonymous. You go through Tor, which is this multi-level web anonymizer to guarantee your privacy, and you ship the bitcoins to this Silk Road, and they will send you whatever it is that you want. in the mail. And they talk about this guy who got these psychedelic drugs in the post from Canada. And wow, this is the wave of the future and everything. And immediately the red lights go off and the bells are ringing and the flags are flapping. And I am smelling a big, fat, election season government rat here. Because is there anybody listening to this show that really thinks that illegal drugs can be sent across the border into the United States in regular mail without being detected and intercepted? When mail crosses the border into the U.S., it gets x-rayed, scanned, sniffed, chemical wiped. U.S. Customs confiscated a green laser pointer I had bought from a website in China. That tells you how carefully they're looking at this stuff. So there is no way that illegal drugs are simply going to get mailed across the borders from this Silk Road website into the United States of America without being detected by the postal authorities and customs, and both sender and receiver being arrested. It doesn't make sense unless this is a covert government operation. Remember we said 1/4 of all computer criminals are working for the FBI. So there's already a 25% chance this website is a government front operation of some kind. So why would somebody do something like this? Well, very, very simple. Obama cannot run on the wars, on the economy, on Israel, or his handling of the natural disasters that continue to attack the country. But a scandal, a nice, juicy, made-for-the-media scandal, for the corporate media that's bashing the Internet, and the alternative media and those gosh darn bloggers involving digital cash, the Tor Anonymous Network, an online illegal drug supplier, and one dumb kid dead of an overdose. And Obama he's got his issue. He can wave a flag in the bloody shirt and the overdose kid shirt, and we've got for the children. And he's got this issue that he can stand on, the cybersecurity initiative that will ban anonymizers and license all websites and bring government control to this outlaw area of truth and justice. No, this outlaw area of drugs and threat to the children and a black market economy that doesn't want to be taxed. Those evil people out there. And so I got to tell you, the more I look at this and the more I think about it, it just doesn't make sense. You cannot mail drugs across the border. That's how, we've got all these celebrities that got nailed for, what's his name, from Gilligan's Island. Bob Denver was having pot mailed to him from outside the country, and he got caught and put in jail. It happens all the time. It is simply not possible for the Silk Road to be conducting this business across the borders of the United States without detection, unless it is a government operation to set us all up by creating a scandal and a crisis. And the government will have to come in and totally bring about Internet 2 under government control for the sake of the children. I'm smelling a rat here, folks. Do not go anywhere near this Silk Road website. It smells like a trap. And I know you're only supposed to reach it through Tor, but for all we know, Tor is compromised and it is saving the destinations of all of this stuff. We cannot really know. It just doesn't feel right to me. My gut is telling me this is the beginning of a false flag in cyberspace to bring about more draconian government control. We're going to go to the phones here now. We've got Robert in Brooklyn. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing there, Mike? I thought you
I'm hanging
went
in there
away.
for a Wednesday.
No. I had problems with I thought you went off on Justin TV, no more shows. Then you went on Renice, the network. I got really baffled.
That's where we are now. That's where we are now.
Okay, everything's okay now.
That handsome devil in the control room is, yeah.
Yeah, I spoke to
anyway,
him, I think.
Yeah, what is on your mind?
Okay, I think it was on your website about the student loan SWAT team thing.
Yes.
Yeah, they come and take this guy away with his 3 children and his underwear. What the hell is going on? If this is true, you got here it is in black and white. I mean, they come for a student loan thing. The wife is not home. She defaulted on her loans. Is this sending another message to everybody? Because the other day, they're screaming bloody murder about everybody defaulting on the student loans.
Well, the student loans are the student loans are the new bubble. Because believe it or not, what they did with the mortgages back in the mid-2000s, they already started doing with student loans. They had all these student loans out there, and they started bundling them as investments. This is the new bubble, and this is going to be the new disaster. And so because the student loans, they don't have property that can be seized, in order to keep this bubble from collapsing, they're basically pounding on the doors. Now, what makes this story interesting, it isn't that the wife was not home. They're separated. She doesn't even live there.
Right,
and so this SWAT team, acting on orders from the United States Department of Education, busted down the door of a California home at 6 a.m.
Department of Education. Unbelievable.
Yeah, the Department of Education now has police powers. And they didn't get any money for it. They spent a lot of money doing it, and the woman isn't even there anymore. She's been gone. She has been gone. She wasn't there.
Yeah, how much does she owe? Do you know?
I really don't know, and that's not the point.
That's not mentioned?
That is not the point.
It's not mentioned? It could be $17.25 for all we know.
It could very easily be. I think they're trying to send a message, pay back your student loans. But you know something? There's a real simple reality here. We here in the United... Robert, my turn, because we're coming up to a commercial break. We here in the United States of America are basically honorable people, and we will pay our bills and our taxes as long as you let us keep the jobs that allow us to do so. But when you take the jobs away, that's a whole different set of rules and non-rules. We'll be right back after commercials.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Tony in Indiana. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Congratulations on your new gig.
Thank you.
A couple things I want to touch on. The first one being, real quickly, you talked about it yesterday, the Clinton administration embezzling the Social Security funds and claiming, oh, look at our surplus. And the question I have about that, well, first of all, I'm sure most of your listeners here aren't Republicans or Democrats, but and me either. I see through their veneer. But my question is, how come the Republicans, and believe me, I believe everything about it, about the surplus being false, but how come the Republicans have not been using it as an issue currently or ever, or you haven't heard them talk about saying, oh, look what Clinton did, he robbed the Social Security fund? That's my first question.
Well, because Clinton wasn't able to do it all by himself. He called it a loan, and basically Congress went along with it because the Republicans were promising their constituents lower taxes and the Democrats were promising their constituents enhanced spending. Everybody was getting what they wanted, and they were all thinking, when it finally becomes a problem, it'll be somebody else's administration and some other Congress that has to clean up the mess. And here we are right now.
That harkens back to that. You said, I remember you saying that's one of the good things about being a king. You have to live through your mistakes.
You're stuck with the job. Yeah, you get to live with your mistakes.
Right. Okay. But one other thing.
Let me make one more comment, and then we'll get on to your second point here. But I did have one more response, and that is, in politics, especially American politics, there are two kinds of scandals and secrets. There's the small, contained, controlled ones that you can use against your opposing candidate or your opposing party. And then there are the really big secrets everybody mutually has to keep together, or it's going to bring the whole government down, and then everybody's out of work. And, those are the ones which, by gentlemen's agreement, Republicans and Democrats, they don't talk about. They sort of agree. I won't talk about how Vince Foster really died, and you won't talk about how Bill Clinton looted Social Security. That kind of a deal going on in the back rooms. What was your next thought?
You're right. Oh, you've talked about the police brutality that goes across the country, and I wanted to touch on this. I don't know how you can, this criminal LEAP program, the acronym Law Enforcement Exchange Program, where they send these elected sheriffs of counties and police captains in certain cities to Israel to learn the IDF tactics, and we're seeing this in the streets, and I'll listen. Thank you.
That's exactly right, like the situation down in Miami where they're literally stealing cell phones and smashing them so that people cannot put video of the atrocities out there on YouTube. Yeah, that's exactly where this stuff comes. We're all being treated like Palestinians because our police are being trained by Israel. And that's exactly what we're seeing in front of us. Happened up in Manchester, New Hampshire. Police were confiscating cell phones, and the police don't really have a legal right to do that. If the cell phone is not involved in the commission of a real crime, they cannot take your cell phone or your camera without a legal subpoena. But they're doing it anyway. And, you know, they're getting away with it because the government wants the public repressed down, and you're absolutely right. All of these police chiefs are being sent over to be trained in Israel, and along with coming back and saying it's okay to bust heads if nobody's looking, is they're all being preconditioned to think that all the problems that are going on in the streets of America are because of those gosh darned Arab Muslims. And they're being brainwashed to see all of the problems coming from this target group. Hitler did exactly the same thing with the Gestapo and the SS. Oh, it's all the fault of those Jewish people over there. And it's the same game all over again. They've just changed which ethnic group is going to get whooped on. Are you there? Tony? Guess we lost Tony. All righty then. A little bit of news from the world of polling. Everybody's starting to crank up the polling into the election season, and half the polls are saying everything is great. The other half are saying, oh, man, it's really in trouble. But Barack Obama, at least from the point of view of the press in Europe, Barack Obama is losing the youth vote here in the United States of America. Remember, young people were really a major, major part of his election victory back in 2008. And I remember I was still working on the crew for Lost, and obviously the election was big news, and everybody wanted Obama because he was cool, and he was black, and he was young. And he's lost that now because the young people don't think he's cool anymore. They've seen the lies and the deceptions. They've seen their fellow kids, young people coming back from the wars, you know, in these boxes. And Obama has lost that section from he's lost that part of his support here. And it sort of leads to this thing. You know, cool people actually don't make very good leaders. And really great leaders are rarely seen as cool by their constituents. So that's kind of what's going on there. We got a caller, Clint from Las Vegas. Aloha. Clint, what's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
I'm hanging in there.
Well, you was talking about the oil situation, and I just wanted to mention that just last week they closed down the gas pipeline they were going to build. I'm a pipe fitter instrument tech, as I told you a couple times before. They were going to build a pipeline from Prudhoe Bay, and huge pipeline. It's 4 foot in diameter at about 2,000 psi. And they were going to run it down from Prudhoe Bay and tie it into the Calgary fields. And the remainder lines have already been built lower than that, and they shut it down. Mike, I got to say this: our leaders, they don't care about us.
No, they don't.
We could be energy independent very easily. When I was at Prudhoe Bay, they discovered besides Gull Island, they discovered another huge field, at least as big as Prudhoe Bay, if not bigger, and they know of a couple others. And it was the talk of the camp, and they could easily build 3 more pipelines coming down. And I think the reason that they want to use Mideast oil is because they want to keep us there. They want an excuse to keep us there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right here because, you know, they want to basically control Middle Eastern oil in order to convince other countries dependent on that oil to not call in their debts with the United States government. Also, if the United States is not only controlling the oil within its own borders, not very well, as we saw with the Deepwater Horizon, I might add, but if it's also able to control Mideast oil, then it's in a position to strategically control conventional warfare. because conventional warfare still lives and dies on fuel supplies, as Hitler learned in World War II. And if the United States is able to say, we can turn off the valves now, then they get to pick and choose who is able to conduct conventional war going into the rest of the 21st century. I'm going to speculate here that starting with this current slam against Iran and Venezuela, there's going to be an effort by the United States of America to break up OPEC in order to start picking these nations off one at a time and bring them all under American/Israeli control in order to basically have a choke point. Because if there's a lot of oil, it doesn't do the oil barons and the governments any good. What they want is the illusion of very little oil. They've got control of it all. Therefore, you will do what they say and you will pay them the price that they want. Of course, when somebody else has their hand on the valve, which is OPEC, and they're saying you're going to pay the price that we want, then obviously they're going to be the bad people.
Right. Let me make 2 more points. I think it's a combination, and you touched on this, it's a combination of Rothschild, countries that don't have Rothschild-controlled banking systems. It's a combination of wanting to start World War III, and a combination of Americans thinking that we're really short of oil and we need foreign oil, which is not the case.
No, that's absolutely, definitely not the case.
Yeah, I'm in this industry, and I go around to these places, and it's the talk. It's almost like 9/11. You got about a third of the country, or 40% of the country, knowing that it's an inside job. You got almost 100% of these oil industry people who know this is not the case. And
yeah, it is. It's a really big hoax, and as somebody in the chat room was pointing out here, even in school today, we're still talking, these are fossil fuels. They come from fossils. And actually, no, they don't. The misnomer fossil fuel began in the days of coal, where the coal would be seen to have fossils in it. But the fossils were still the fossils. The remnants of the life forms were still there. What we were seeing was this oil had bubbled up into the strata where the fossils were and then solidified. That's all coal really is a harder form of petroleum. And we understand now that the petroleum itself is being formed by deep crust microbes under heat and pressure. They're forming these long-chain hydrocarbons that basically seep up. There have been oil fields declared to be completely empty, and they go back in and they drill a test well, and they find, wow, they're filling up again. But if oil is known to be renewing itself from inside the core of the earth, and it's available everywhere, then the governments and corporations that empower themselves by sitting astride that flow of oil, they lose power and authority. If you ever read Frank Herbert's book, Dune, because if you substitute, it's a wonderful book. The first one especially, you should read it, because if you substitute oil for the spice, the politics all make sense, and I really do think that was what Frank Herbert was trying to comment on, was the politics of oil production and consumption and distribution here on planet Earth, because the politics all seem to be the same, and it's just as dirty.
Lindsey Williams came up with a statement that I want to bring up one more point after this. Lindsey Williams made a statement that a decision was made in the 50s or 60s by the Henry Kissinger type that we were going to use oil as a means of control. And what happened was all of a sudden they found out they had so much more oil than they really realized what they had. But in Prudhoe Bay, I can say right here on the radio, okay, I've seen with my very eyes that the wellhead pressure, you do not have to pump the oil at Prudhoe Bay. It's under that much pressure. The wellhead pressure of 1,500 psi has never gone down. And I sat there and looked at the gauge myself. And
pretty amazing stuff.
The earth produces it deep within the mantles of the earth. It's just like pus on a boil, and it produces it as fast as we can pump it out.
Okay, Clint, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for the news. All right, thanks an awful lot. We'll talk to you later when we come back. Anthony Ibarra. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, second hour here. And I was just listening to the news broadcast. 2 new elements, and they decay just a few seconds after they're created. I think that's what they built my Xterra out of, to be very honest here. And the other interesting stories they're going on about, what, this heat wave, and it's sweltering, and it's 90 degrees along the eastern seaboard. Well, was 90 degrees along the eastern seaboard when I was a kid in New England, and it wasn't considered a big deal. They're coming back to push this whole global warming thing again. It's not that warm. 90, that's normal. That's normal. It was normal when I was a kid, years ago. Did you see that kind of news coverage over the fact that we had snow on the top of the Big Island this last weekend in June in the tropics? No, that sort of came and went. We can't talk about that. Snow in Hawaii in June? No. That doesn't suit the agenda of carbon tax and a global environmental authority. All right, I want to get on to our guest here. Joining us on the line is Anthony Ibarra of Diginet. And Anthony, welcome to the show. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Mike, thanks for having me here. And talking about global warming, why don't they mention in Colorado that in all of May, we had weather that was 45 degrees. They're never going to bring that up. They just want to bring up, wow, it was 95 degrees yesterday in Denver, but guess what? It's summertime.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Of course it's supposed to be warm. But the agenda is to sell a carbon tax because without it our government is broke, and they want to use global warming as the excuse to bring about a global government because the global flu pandemic, the when pigs fly flu, that didn't work out. And most of the world's people understand now that the global global economic catastrophe was brought about as a result of the global banking cartel, and so more globalism is not going to fix that. But the reason I had you here on the show today, I want to get back to these stories that we're seeing about police in Miami who were seizing cell phones and destroying them, trying to keep this shooting of an unarmed man from going viral. Up in Manchester, New Hampshire, the other day had the same thing. The police are basically, beating on peaceful protesters and then seizing cameras and cell phones. And we've reached the point right now where the police are openly violating the Constitution. They're committing illegal acts. They're confiscating cameras and cell phones, even though they legally don't have a right to do so. The courts have ruled repeatedly that private citizens have a right to take pictures and videotape in public anything they want. There is no legal basis for the police to say, you cannot videotape this, you cannot take the pictures, please give me the camera. And so the reason I wanted you on the show is because your company makes these really cool video camcorders, the pen and the glasses, and the longtime listeners know you actually sent me a couple that were really, really cool, and I had a lot of fun with them, and right now they're in the hands of the prop department for the Hawaii Five-0 TV series. I'm hoping they'll get used on air this next season. I have my spies keeping an eye out for that. But they're really very nice devices, and, you can dismiss them as kind of cool, geeky toys, but we seem to be entering a time in our history where covert TV surveillance by the citizens of the government and police authorities is becoming a necessary survival tool, not just to have the equipment, but to basically make sure the police understand, yeah, you can go around grabbing cell phones and cameras, but there are going to be cameras there you don't know about. And if we can put that fear in their minds, if we can make them doubt that they can control the flow of information, they might go back to behaving in accordance with the Constitution.
I think you're right, Michael, and especially with the recent incidents that have occurred, specifically in Miami, where, the cops chased down this citizen that used his cell phone to take video of shooting an unarmed man. And we are coming to a time where if you had a covert recording, video and audio recording device, such as one of our DigiPens or our DigiSpy glasses, they have no idea then that you're doing recording, and you're going to see them for what they are. And not all law enforcement is that way, but there is that element where the cops have become the thugs, and they see you with holding up your cell phone, taking video. They're going to chase you down. They're going to beat you up. They're going to smash the phone. They're going to do everything in their power to keep them from being shamed and showing the citizens of this country what our law enforcement has really become. We did discuss briefly also last week about these no-knock home invasions where they don't even need to have any type of a search warrant to come into your home. We have a device that looks like a simple clock radio that is that is based on motion detection, so you're not using up all of your space. But the moment they try to come in, you're going to have that kind of video to really protect yourself and your family. And God forbid if someone is hurt, again, it's going to show the ruthlessness that our police force has become against its citizens.
Yeah, I mean, that is really so important. I mean, in the situation in Miami, you had a police officer pointing his gun at the guy with the cell phone, and ultimately the guy with the cell phone did surrender the phone, and it was destroyed. Fortunately, he'd pulled the SIM card and concealed it, which is why the video got out. But I mean, if you want to talk about Gestapo tactics, that is it. And as we had this caller in the previous hour called in and said, police chiefs across America are being sent to Israel to learn how to treat Americans the way the Israelis treat the Palestinians. And they're coming back, and as Manchester and Miami just showed, they've learned their lesson well. Keep us down, keep us beat down, just confiscate the incriminating evidence so it doesn't go public, and smash cell phones and stuff. And I mean, that really is true Gestapo tactics. And my theory, and the reason I keep having you back on this show, and the reason I'm going to keep having you back on this show, is if we let the police know that any gathering of patriots, there are going to be 5 or 6 people with these concealed TV cameras that they can't find, then that's going to be a very chilling situation. I'm not suggesting that people buy these things to actually catch the police from committing unconstitutional acts. I'm suggesting that people buy them as a deterrent, so the police know they can't get away with committing these unconstitutional acts. So think of it as kind of an insurance policy, to have one of these in your pocket or be wearing the glasses or whatever. We want the police to know they're out there. We don't want them to know who's got them. But we want the police to understand we are arming ourselves with these concealed video recorders.
And you're right. And I'll just give you an example of how they are conditioning the masses in this country. There was an article 2 days ago in the Denver Post here in Denver, and the Regional Transportation District is now sending not a security guard or an RTD employee, but they're sending the Denver Police Department on the buses with their badges showing and demanding that they show their fare ticket. Now, I've commented to my wife, how much money are they losing if 1 or 2 or 10 people a day get on the bus for free? They're not losing anything, but what they are doing is conditioning the masses to accept the cops or the Gestapo tactics to come up to you and say, show us your papers. Now, right now, they're just starting with show us your bus ticket. But what's going to stop?
Well, that is your paper. That is your paper. And how much money are they spending to put the police on the bus at a time, especially when crime is going through the roof? I mean, we've got that problem here in Hawaii. All the cops are out writing traffic tickets because that's a revenue generation. We're having, robberies, rapes, drug dealing is completely out of control here, and the cops can't be bothered. There's no budget to actually deal with crime. All the focus and all the budget is down there in revenue generating events.
That's exactly right. And if you do have some type of covert weapon, and really the bottom line is what it really comes down to is to show the country what is happening with our law enforcement. And it's not just in Denver. It's not just in Hawaii. This is
everywhere.
Epidemic throughout the country. And if we do have 5 to 6 people that are wearing covert devices, how can they go out to the crowd and ask every person that has a pen in their pocket, give me your pen? They don't have the time to do that. And that's why we're going to be able to get more video out there on YouTube so that people know what's going on, to get them out on your website to let people know this is what is happening today with our law enforcement. I met a man a few years ago, probably 15 years ago, and he had two little ceramic statues. One was law enforcement to serve and protect, and the officer was helping a young little girl across the street. And then today's image, the ceramic he had, was a SWAT team with his face covered, holding an M16. And it wasn't to serve and to protect, but it was to intimidate and threaten. And that's what we've come up with our law enforcement today.
You know, and what you said before about it happening everywhere, you know, I'm originally from New England. I was born in Boston. I grew up in a farm in New Hampshire. And so when I heard the story about Miami, I say that's Miami. But then I hear it's happening in Manchester. That's not what happened when I was young. Anthony, stay with us. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Anthony Ibarra from Diginet, which makes these covert concealed video recorders in pens and clocks and eyeglasses and a bunch of other really interesting stuff. And I've played with the hardware myself. It's a lot of fun to play with. But in this day and age of the police seizing and destroying cameras from private citizens without legal grounds to do so, having these covert video systems out there merely to act as a deterrent to unconstitutional activity, I think is a really important thing for anybody who's a patriot. If you're going to be participating in protest marches or gatherings, having these things with you, even if you don't turn them on, they're mere presence is going to change the dynamic of the relationship between the police and ordinary citizens. I just put up this video, or actually a member posted a video, and I just promoted it to the front page at whatreallyhappened.com. We are Change San Antonio, citizen journalism sweeping the globe, and this is basically a mass movement. We understand the corporate media cannot be trusted to tell us the truth about anything, such as those big whoppers about radiation is good for you following the Fukushima melt-throughs. So people around the world are understanding we have to be our own media, and we have to tell ourselves what's going on, because we're not going to get it from the government, and we're not going to get it from the corporate-owned media. So getting back to you, Anthony, first of all, before we run out of time and get lost, tell people your website and give them a rundown of some of the other covert video products that you have available.
Okay. Mike, our website is diginet.net, and I'm going to spell it. It's DIGANET.net. Again, that's DIGANET.net. It's diginet.net. Our phone number is 303-455-9545. Again, it's 303-455-9545. And not only do we sell the pens and the glasses, but we have ties that are video audio recorders. We have buttons that are video audio recorders. We've got the whole gamut of devices that can be used. For the home, you can have a clock that's a video audio recorder. You can have a smoke detector. And again, really what it comes down to is really being proactive. You don't know, and especially if you are involved in going out to protests, because that's what's going to make change in this country, is if we get involved and start protesting some of these things that are happening. But if you do have a covert video audio recorder with you, whether it be a pen, the sunglasses, a tie, or a button, you may get some video that is going to rock the socks off of that particular city. And let me mention, you just said you posted a video that this tyranny is not just happening in our country. We have sold thousands of our products around the world, because the New World Order is not just happening here in the United States. We've sold them in Europe. We've sold them in the Middle East. We've sold them as far away as Norway and Australia. Tyranny is happening all over the country, and people are catching on that law enforcement in this country, even though we have a constitutional right to do video and audio recording, they're going to do everything in their power to keep that kind of media from being put out across the Internet. As you mentioned, most of the media that we see today that is mainstream, they're never going to show this stuff. The only time they show it is when it becomes so big that they're fools if they don't show it.
Yeah,
and
that's
we
it.
need to make that change.
If the corporate media knows that a video is all over the Internet, then they understand if they don't deal with it, it just makes them look worse. And the power of the video can be really amazing. Just on a more benign level, this story about the airline that has sort of changed its policy because they were charging the returning soldiers for their checked luggage and everything. Just that little bit of public embarrassment can really change the dynamic there. And the other thing I wanted to remind everybody about, the advantage of having these video cameras from Diginet is they are not something that can be remotely shut down. We're starting to now hear this so-called intellectual property rights system that they're going to start having at concerts, where if you have a commercial cell phone or camcorder, they're going to flash this little signal light by the stage that will turn off your cell phone or your camcorder so you don't record things that you're not licensed to record. It's going to be a big legal fight about it. But obviously, if this technology is going to be built into the cell phones and the camcorders, then the police are just going to have this on the top of their cars as a matter of course. So having a covert video recording system that does not respond to these remote shutdown signals is going to be more and more important in the coming years.
And when you see that the cell phones are being mass-produced by corporate giants, they're going to follow suit and they're going to bow to whatever pressures the government gives them. And you are right. With these types of covert devices, you can simply have that running. There's no way you're not transmitting this signal wirelessly. You're storing it right inside the internal device that you're using. And again, it gives you a right. I mean, if you want to go to a video, or if you want to go to a concert and you want it for your own use, well, you use it. But more importantly, and what I really see, Michael, is that we've got to change the way that we as protesters go out there. We have to go armed. I'm not talking with guns and knives. I'm talking armed with video and audio, because that's even more powerful.
Armed with the media, our own media.
Exactly.
All righty. Well, Anthony, we're coming to the end of the segment, and I'm going to let you go. Actually, we do have a caller on the line, I think has a question. Real quick, Ruth, we're almost out of time this segment. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to comment that Chicago is prime and ready for rioting, and we need them here.
You need the pins and the sunglasses there in Chicago. I would agree, especially with Rahm running the place there and all this other stuff going on. We understand that we're already seeing this run up to using the old Sears Tower. It's full of asbestos. The tenants are moving out. It almost seems like another classic case of a building ready to come down anyway that could be used for a false flag attack to kick off another war. So, yeah, the more cameras are out there on the streets, the better it's going to be to deter another false flag.
Thank you.
All right,
and
thank you.
And, Michael, if I can leave you with this, if for the next week, if any of your listeners contact us via the phone at 303-455-9545, 303-455-9545, we will give 15% off on any of our items that they see on our website at diginet.net.
All right, that's a very, very generous discount, and I've already posted your website to the front of whatreallyhappened.com, and hopefully we'll have some people showing some interest. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you, Anthony. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at this thing somebody sent me earlier today, and it's titled Proving Atheists Wrong with Science, Number 1. And I think in a minute it'll be obvious why there is no number 2. And it says, basically, the amount of water on Earth is 1.386 times 10 to the 21st liters. And then it goes on to say there are 6 billion people on Earth. And if the Earth had been around for 3 billion years, there would be no water because it would have all been drunk up by now. But since the oceans are still full of water, obviously the Earth can only be 6,000 years old, as the Bible says. And after I get back from the bathroom, I'm going to explain to you why that is, of course, complete and utter nonsense. Now, on a more serious note, the situation in Fukushima continues to really deteriorate. They are now detecting in Seattle, Washington, United States of America, nuclear particles, not just radiation, but actual particles, contamination, at about half the level that they're seeing in Tokyo. Now, radiation is one thing. The real danger, though, is contamination, which is inhaling or ingesting an actual particle of a radioisotope that continues to decay and pump radiation into your body from the inside. If you inhale a piece of plutonium dust or plutonium oxide dust, too small to see. It's an engraved invitation to cancer because it will simply sit in your lung and go on radiating you from the inside until you do succumb to serious, serious illness. Now, as you're probably already aware, we reported it briefly yesterday, Japan and TEPCO are completing this very long, detailed report, the official formal report for the International Atomic Energy Agency, and they're basically admitting that reactors 1, 2, and 3 melted down and burned through the pressure vessel for the reactor and the containment and dumped this radioactive fuel slag, this lava, onto the floor of the buildings where presumably for the last 80-plus days it has been burning its way down into the ground. That's what the China syndrome is all about. A very, very good movie made by starring Jack Lemmon and Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas, and it came out within weeks of the real disaster at 3 Mile Island. So if you have not seen that movie, you need to, because it really clarifies a lot of what they're dealing with. What has happened in Fukushima is the China syndrome times 3. And I don't know how they're going to fix it. I don't think they can fix it. It's just obvious. Now they're saying it was known to be melted down and burned through right from the very start. But they didn't want to say it because we might get upset and we might stop buying Japanese sushi and we might cancel our vacation plans to go to Tokyo Disneyland or Mount Fuji. We might stop buying all those wonderful little Japanese electronics or these Japanese cars, some of which are being returned to Japan because they're coming off the cargo ships radioactive. Now, Japan is getting ready to enlarge yet again the mandatory evacuation zone around Fukushima. So here in the United States of America, what are they doing to make sure that we don't suffer the same kind of a situation? And the answer is pretty much nothing. The reason the corporate media continues to trivialize and downplay and basically ignore what's going on over in Japan is because we have a lot of nuclear reactors here in the United States of America, including quite a few that are of the same exact identical General Electric design. Now, over in New York, one of the operators of their nuclear plants is called Entergy. And apparently, they have been running and been allowed to run without the required minimum of fire protection should there be an outbreak of fire in the reactor building or in the containment. And they're basically saying, we have these exemptions. The government has given us exemptions to say we can go on doing what we're doing without the safety equipment that is normally mandated. Exemptions. I've heard that word before down in the Gulf of Mexico, where even after the Deepwater Horizon accident, the Obama administration was handing out exemptions to allow drilling platforms to continue to operate without required safety systems. Most importantly, the acoustic automatic blowout preventers, which are required mandatory pieces of equipment virtually every other oil-producing nation on Earth. But in the Gulf of Mexico, nah, it's a useless luxury. You don't need to spend that $500,000 on that device. Give it to your executives for bonuses, or more importantly, give it to me for my campaign. Because remember, British Petroleum gave a lot of money to Barack Obama for his 2008 campaign. And he sure paid them back. They got off cheap for the damage they caused to the Gulf of Mexico. So what happens when British Petroleum got all these exemptions in the Gulf of Mexico? We had a disaster. Now we're finding that a lot of these nuclear reactors in the United States are running with exemptions. They're being allowed to run without all the necessary safety equipment to save a few bucks. The money junkies are in charge of safety, and every time they are, there is a disaster to happen. And we're looking at one right now. Other countries like France are getting ready to get rid of nuclear power. They understand. They're looking at what happened in Japan. Our country, the United States of America, they don't want to look at it. They don't want to deal with it. And I'll tell you another reason why. Because we've got this agenda to demonize fossil fuels and impose carbon taxes. And all of the green environmentalist people, and don't get me wrong, I love nature and I believe in the wise use of resources. But some of the more fanatical, opportunistic, let's use this as an excuse to get money and power environmentalists have been screaming about, we got to go nuclear because that's safer and cleaner and more environmentally friendly than petroleum. Not anymore. Not anymore. Not after Fukushima. As bad as the Gulf of Mexico was destroyed by oil and corrects it, it's nothing compared to what's happening in the North Pacific Ocean right now. With 3 China-syndromed reactors. Let's shorten it, call them China'd. These 3 reactors, China'd. Their fuel loads are down in the ground somewhere. Nobody knows exactly where. They can't get close enough to find out. All they know is for certain is that reactor number 1, the amount of radioactivity coming out of the wreckage continues to increase every single day, which tells us somewhere down there, fission is continuing to occur. All right, interesting little story. We're almost at the end of our segment here, but I want to talk about the economy when we come back, because ultimately the economy is something that does, in fact, impact all of our lives. So when we get back, interesting development relative to the Federal Reserve. You'll find it fascinating. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy. Before I get into this, though, a little note. Apparently, the legislature of Switzerland has approved the phase out of all nuclear power in that country. So 1 down and 1 to go on that situation. And it's this growing awareness, fission power is not the solution. And it's not clean and it's not environmentally friendly, because everybody who talks about the environmental friendliness of nuclear power, they somehow forget to include in those calculations decommissioning the reactor and getting rid of those fuel rods, which are some of the most toxic things you can be pouring into the environment. All right, that aside, I want to move along to this. As you know, I view the entire Federal Reserve System as basically little more than a legalized counterfeiting operation where they're just given the legal right to print up these pretty printed pieces of paper. It's just paper and colored ink, and we are required by law to accept it as full value money to be loaned to us at interest. And we must then provide in work product the full face value of that pretty printed piece of paper, plus interest accumulating over time. And, of course, it's this pyramid and Ponzi scheme that enriches the bankers and impoverishes the people. And it's basically legalized counterfeiting. So now we have this gentleman by the name of Scott Beach. And he has brought a lawsuit against the Federal Reserve of Atlanta. And I think this is a very timely situation. You're probably aware from yesterday's show, there's this couple, the Bank of America tried to foreclose on their homes. Bank of America did not have a mortgage on that home. There was no mortgage on the home at all. It was paid free and clear, paid cash for. And Bank of America still tried to foreclose and take it. So the couple took Bank of America to court. Bank of America lost. The court ordered Bank of America to pay legal costs. Bank of America failed to do so. And the couple has now basically seized assets of Bank of America, essentially foreclosing on them. So with that victory in mind, we want to talk about Scott Beach's complaint. He is basically suing the Federal Reserve, specifically the Atlanta branch, pointing out that in 12 United States Code Section 341 allows people to sue the Federal Reserve banks. They are not immune from lawsuits from you, the American people. And they can lose their franchise. They can lose their charter if they violate United States law. They are not above the law. Now, basically, the substance of the lawsuit is arguing that the Federal Reserve has stopped authorizing redeeming of Federal Reserve notes in the early 2000s, when this whole mortgage-backed security fraud started really taking off. And they had to start quantitative easing. They started issuing paper notes that were not redeemable. But 12 United States Code Section 411 requires all Federal Reserve notes to be redeemable in something of value equivalent to the face value. There have to be assets somewhere in the Federal Reserve System that justify the creation of that money. That's sort of the means by which they prevent runaway inflation. Not that it's worked, because in 2000 the Fed said, well, to heck with redemption, we're just going to crank them out. So basically what Scott Beach's lawsuit is saying is the Federal Reserve has violated the law under which it's allowed to operate. And because the law allows them to be sued and lose their charter, that is what he's attempting to do. I wish him a lot of luck. I think he's going to have a really hard time finding a judge who's going to be honest about the criminality of the Federal Reserve, just as you really cannot find a judge, with the exception of James C. Fox, of course, who's willing to admit in court that the 16th Amendment actually failed ratification. Because judges know where their paychecks are coming from, and they're not going to do anything to rock that boat. But looking at the letter of the law, Scott is absolutely correct. The Federal Reserve is not allowed to break the law. They're not allowed to issue unredeemable notes, and they are allowed to be sued and lose their franchise for violations of the law. So we need to keep some attention on this, because it appears there's a legal ground for we, the American people, to demand the Federal Reserve be shut down and go back to the banking system that worked for the American people before the money junkies hijacked it. The government issues its own value-based currency to purchase what it needs. The money circulates through the society without interest charges in order to allow commerce to occur. And then it's taxed back at the end of the year by the government in order to balance the books. A zero-sum game without a private banker simply looting the cash flow as it flies by. There appears to be a legal foundation for saying that the Federal Reserve is actually now operating criminally and should lose its charter for that point. So we need to keep some attention on this. We need to keep focus on this as much as we possibly can. All righty, moving right along here. Now, obviously, default is becoming a big issue here in the United States of America. Both parties are pointing fingers at each other and saying, you're the reason we can't raise the debt ceiling. And if the debt ceiling is not raised, forecasts are that the United States government will start defaulting on its obligations sometime in early August. The whole thing could come crashing down by the end of August, just in time for my birthday. Boy, what a party I would throw for that. Now, people are already looking at Greece probably going into default very soon because the people don't want to be taxed anymore. They're tired of being looted to give to the bankers. The Greek government doesn't know what to do. They may be looking at default. What will happen when Greece defaults as an integrated part of the European Union? Every bank in Greece is probably going to go insolvent. The Greek government will probably be forced to nationalize all of the Greek banks and then basically say, you're not allowed to withdraw your money from the banks until we sort this mess out. And by the way, the legal foundation already exists in the United States of America where the president can order ATM machines shut down to prevent a run on the bank. It's your money. And the president has the legal authority to say the banks can hang on to your money until they decide they're in a position to give it back to you. That is a fascist dictatorship, when the government and the banks are able to handle your money to their benefit and not yours. Good reason to keep a lot of cash. In fact, good reason to just take your money out of the bank. They'll just print up more to replace it anyway. And keep it buried, in a cookie jar or a floor safe or a firebox or something like that. Have enough money in your home to take care of your family for a couple of weeks, because when things start coming apart, cash will be king. That plastic card is not going to be worth anything at all. Meanwhile, over in France, and this may be a warning sign, the biggest bank in France has, across the board, cut the maximum allowable ATM withdrawal in half. So if your ATM card allowed you to take out 500 francs per day, now it's down to 250. No explanation. And the French people are just going absolutely bonkers. They want to know what's going on. Remember when Citibank cut ATM max deposits here and they said, it's because we were being hacked, and nobody else reported the hack. And then, of course, later on we found out Citi was in serious, serious trouble because of this mortgage-backed security fraud. A reminder that HBO film Too Big to Fail is not an accurate portrayal of what happened. You need to go out and get the documentary Inside Job to really see what's going on. It is up online, a couple of different places. There's apparently it's chapterized on YouTube if you want to go look at it. But really, the guy who produced this thing, he deserves to be paid for his work. Rent it from Netflix or go buy it at the store if you can find it. Things almost impossible. This won the Academy Award for Best Documentary this year. And except for online, you can't find it anywhere. It's obvious that the corporate media and government don't want you to see that video. They're going to distract you with these other HBO pseudo docudramas and stuff like this. Now, a little bit of a warning coming from Europe also, and this may be tied in with this whole situation with the French ATM machines. The world's top 14 derivatives dealers are now saying they cannot clear the accumulated derivatives transactions without cash injections. Cash injections. Boy, I wonder where they're going to get that money from, or more to the point, who they're going to get that money from. So remember what I said before when this fraudulent mortgage-backed security thing started to really come apart. The problem was never the mortgage-backed securities themselves, because they could just be redeemed for the initial investment. The real bite, the real disaster, were the derivatives, which were piling up with this incredible leveraging, where $1 in losses was leading to $100 in derivatives costs. It was gambling. Wall Street was turned into a giant open-air casino, and the American people lost. Because the American financial system is being run like a casino where if the players win, they get to take the money home. And if they lose, the casino management goes around to all the workers, to the bellhops and the barmaids and the front desk personnel and the janitors and the plumbers and the laundry people, and passes the hat and says, you got to chip in. We got to bail this player out, or he's not going to want to play with us anymore. And they pass the hat, and they give it back to the player so you can go back for another spin at the wheel. If you ran a casino like that, everybody'd want to come and be there. Nobody'd want to work there. But that's the way they're running the American economy. The bankers are still being propped up by U.S. tax dollars, and they're still allowed to go out and make these very reckless attempts to just make huge amounts of money with very, very little work. And it's very dangerous and reckless, and the derivatives are the real problem. We still don't know the total exposure there. Derivatives can make you very rich very quickly with very little money, but when the market shifts against you, and it's still against us, and the real estate prices are still against it, then you can lose money just as fast. And it's all paper debt. It's not like the money really exists. It is a gambling debt. When you lose your horse race and you owe, Eddie the ambivalent, $15,000 you lost on the bet, it's not that the $15,000 ever existed. It's a paper debt. It is a manufactured construct from the rules that were set up to benefit the bookie and the racetrack, and in this case, Wall Street. So they're talking about more cash injections to save the derivatives dealers, who were also burned by this Wall Street mortgage-backed security fraud. I think in the future, history books are going to look at the destruction of the United States of America, and they're going to say it was the biggest financial swindle in history perpetrated by Wall Street that destroyed what had once been the greatest nation on the face of this earth. And it's tragic to see it happen. For those of us old enough to remember what this country was supposed to be, those of us whose family roots go back to the founding of this nation, to watch what's happening to this nation, it's like watching a child stricken with cancer just slowly withering away day after day after day, and you're forced to just watch it as it happens in front of you. And that's what it feels like watching what the money junkies have done to this country. That's it for our show. Have a good evening. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Rense Radio Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, and aloha, America.